thousands dead, dozens of cities destroyed, military infrastructure obliterated. This paints the stark panoramic picture of the scene more than 80 years ago, on the 22nd of June 1941, when the Nazi German army officially invaded the territory of the Soviet Union. The attack by the Third Reich's army was sudden and overwhelmingly powerful, while the Red Army suffered staggering losses on every front. So why couldn't the Soviet Union smash the German assault from the moment the intention to attack was formed? Were there fatal mistakes made by the ruling regime? Join Knowledge of Warfare on a journey today to find the answers. After rising to power and launching a global war, Chancellor Hitler began to turn his attention to the Soviet Union, a vast land, rich in resources, sufficient to serve his ambition of world domination. The Austrian artist had argued in his autobiography, Mein Kampf, for the necessity of Lebensraum, or living space. According to this doctrine, Germany needed to conquer the nations of Eastern Europe to expand its territory for the superior Aryan race, that is, pure-blooded Germans. He planned to carry this out as a total war by exterminating or deporting most of the Soviet population to Siberia, then using the remainder as slave labor. The Führer also sought to wipe out the large Jewish population from Eastern Europe as part of the Nazi program to annihilate all Jews in Europe. After his initial assessments, Adolf Hitler saw the Soviet Union as militarily weak and ripe for immediate conquest. On the 3rd of October 1941, he declared, "We only have to kick in the door and the whole rotten structure will come crashing down." The leader of the Third Reich viewed the Soviet armed forces as poorly organized Eastern hordes that could be easily procrened, defeated, cut off, encircled, and annihilated. To some extent, he was right. Because the modernization of Russia had only just begun, Soviet civilization could be sabotaged while it was still on the runway. That is why Hitler schemed to destroy the Soviet Union with a blitzkrieg strategy. Next was to create a powerful psychological impact on the Soviet people. This strategy had been successfully applied by Nazi Germany in Poland, France, and Yugoslavia. The Germans did not conduct a general mobilization of their army, but prepared for the attack on Russia far better than for the campaigns in Poland or France. To appreciate the scale of the disaster for the Soviet defense system in the early days of June 1941, one need only look at the actual statistics to see the clear disparity. The Nazi German army was meticulously prepared before launching a full-scale offensive along three main axes. The first axis was handled by Army Group Center, the most powerful German force, commanded by Field Marshal Fedor von Bock. Deployed in central Poland, it consisted of the 4th and 9th Armies and Panzer Groups 2 and 3, totaling 50 divisions, including 15 panzer divisions and 2 brigades, with support from Air Fleet 2. This army group played the most crucial role, tasked with cutting off and encircling the Soviet forces in Belarus, conquering Belarus, and advancing towards Moscow to capture the capital. Facing this group was the Western Special Military District, later renamed the Western Front of the Soviet Union, commanded by General of the Army, Dmitry Grigorievich Pavlov. It comprised 24 rifle divisions, 12 tank divisions, 6 mechanized divisions, and 2 cavalry divisions. Second was Army Group North, led by Field Marshal Wilhelm Ritter von Lieb. Deployed in East Prussia, it comprised a total of 29 divisions, with support from Air Fleet 1. Its mission was to attack and seize the Soviet republics in the Baltic region, capture a series of ports on the Baltic Sea, and destroy the Baltic Fleet's base. The most important objective was to capture Leningrad. After taking Leningrad, it would join forces with the Finnish army to attack southward, coordinating with Army Group Center to seize the capital, Moscow. Opposing Army Group North was the Pribaltic Special Military District of the Soviet Union, later renamed the Northwestern Front, with a force of 25 Soviet divisions, including 4 tank divisions and 2 mechanized infantry divisions, under the command of Colonel General Fyodor Isidorovich Kuznetsov. Finally, there was Army Group South, commanded by Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt. Deployed in southern Poland and Romania, it was to advance towards Kiev, conquer Ukraine, and annihilate the main Soviet forces west of the Dnieper River. Afterward, it would coordinate with the Romanian army to advance along the Black Sea coast, capturing the Crimean Peninsula and the main base of the Soviet Black Sea Fleet. Air Fleet 4 of Germany, along with the Romanian Air Force, faced off against the Kiev Special Military District of the Soviet Union, later renamed the Southwestern Front. This front was led by Colonel General Mikhail Petrovich Kirponos, with 32 rifle divisions, 16 tank divisions, 8 mechanized divisions, 2 cavalry divisions, and the Odessa Special Military District. Let's pause the narrative here for a moment. Knowledge of warfare has a quick trivia question for you. According to you, how many divisions, in total, did Germany's Army Group South have? Tredev, Tugführer, Femugführer, or Haltrieds? Time's up. Comment with your answer below, and don't miss the reveal at the end of the video. Returning to our story, the situation grew more complex as German forces launched a simultaneous attack along the entire border, from the Barents Sea to the Black Sea. Paving the way for the massive invading armies were ferocious artillery barrages from thousands of cannons and mortars, pounding the most vital targets. Hundreds of aircraft bombed military bases, major cities, and industrial centers. In just a few hours, the Red Army lost up to 1,200 aircraft. It was clear from the very first moments of the war that the Soviet army was completely outmatched by the terrifying power of the Third Reich, with seemingly no chance to repel this horrific storm. According to historians, one of the most significant reasons for the catastrophic defeat in the summer of 1941, and why the Soviet Union couldn't immediately crush the German army from the start, was the miscalculation of the Soviet military and political leadership. They failed to prepare the armed forces to be ready to confront the invasion, despite a flood of information about the impending major aggression. Although there was no exact timeline, intelligence reports about the war had been sent back as early as the beginning of May 1941. Hitler even postponed the invasion date several times, but the Red Army command still hesitated. By the time the decision was made to put the army on full combat alert and to camouflage weapons, airfields, and key infrastructure, it was already too late. Another critical reason for the Red Army's disaster in the initial hours of the war was the deficiency in training for command resources and personnel. Specifically, the Soviet Union was then in a phase of large-scale re-equipment. Many models of military hardware from the 1932 were obsolete, such as the T-26 tanks and the I-16 aircraft. It's true that the new T-34 tanks and Katyusha rocket launchers had appeared, but their numbers were still very limited. After the 1st of September 1939, the army's size increased from 2 million to 5 million men. There simply wasn't enough time to train everyone, from commanders down to the rank-and-file soldiers. The officer corps was largely steeped in a conservative, feudalistic mindset. In contrast, the Third Reich's army had the resources to organize a surprise attack. The Germans knew how to move their forces eastward, using deception and disinformation. Hitler succeeded in waging an information and psychological war, giving Moscow the impression that he had no intention of attacking the Soviet capital. This allowed Nazi Germany to leverage the element of surprise to level the Red Army's positions on the western border, especially in Belarus. During the years of glasnost and perestroika before the collapse of the Soviet Union, a story was fabricated about Stalin's gullibility, claiming that the Soviet leader, due to his stubbornness and foolishness, ignored numerous warnings about Nazi Germany's invasion plans. It was said that Stalin didn't trust his intelligence services, the well-wishers within the Soviet Union, or sources from Britain. However, serious military studies soon emerged that completely refuted this theory. Stalin was not foolish. He possessed a brilliant mind, an iron will, and superb instincts. Otherwise, he could not have become the leader of the Soviet Union during such a pivotal era. There was a mountain of intelligence, but the reported dates varied. Could the British be trying to push Russia and Germany into conflict again, like in 1914? Stalin was determined not to have Russians fight for Britain's interests once more. It's important to understand that Hitler and Stalin were different types of leaders. Stalin was a rigid theorist, while Hitler relied more on his intuition and instincts. The Soviet leader understood that Germany was not ready for a protracted conventional war that would lead to exhaustion. Through intelligence, Moscow knew that Germany had not conducted a general mobilization, that its strategic raw material reserves were low, and that the German army was not prepared for a winter campaign. It had not issued winter uniforms, nor did it have cold-resistant lubricants for its weapons and vehicles. Beyond the disparity in forces and the fatal mistakes of the ruling regime, another reason the Soviet Union could not immediately crush the German attack from the outset was its defense industry. Germany's massive military-industrial complex saw its output increase by 76% in 1940 compared to 1,939, and it was 2.2 times greater than in 1938. In that year, Germany produced over 19 million tons of steel, 14 million tons of pig iron, and 63 billion kilowatt-hour of electricity, along with a colossal amount of oil supplied from newly occupied territories and other Axis sources. Before the war broke out, the defense industry, built by the Third Reich, was capable of supplying 214 divisions, including 21 panzer and 14 mechanized divisions, for a total of 7.2 million troops, with over 5 million active and 2 million in reserve. The German army was extremely well equipped with Mauser submachine guns and MP-38 40-seconds, which gradually replaced single-shot rifles. According to public data, by the 21st of June 1941, the Nazi German army and its Axis allies, comprising 152 German divisions and 38 Allied divisions, with a total of 5.3 million men, were concentrated along a 2,900-kilometer border from the Baltic coast in the north to the Black Sea coast in the south. A huge number of war vehicles were supplied, including about 5,000 tanks and self-propelled guns, with over 2,500 medium tanks, like the Panzer III, Panzer IV, and Stug III, over 3,410 armoured cars, and 600,000 other motorized vehicles. The artillery was equipped with about 47,000 guns, including over 10,000 heavy artillery pieces, with calibers over 85 mm. The Third Reich's Air Force was strengthened with 4,940 combat aircraft and 60 military transport planes. The Navy was extremely formidable, possessing over 300 warships, including 85 cruisers, 105 destroyers, and 86 submarines of various types. To carry out the plan to attack the Soviet Union, Hitler mobilized 3/4 of the German army, along with troops from many Allied nations in Europe, leaving only 1/4 of his forces and equipment in Western Europe and North Africa. This demonstrates the immense industrial potential Germany had prepared for the war, not to mention numerous research projects for new generation weapons and equipment that would only be revealed decades later. On the Soviet side, before the war began, its defense industry had seen strong development following the Third Five-Year Plan from 1936 to 1940. In 1940, the land of the Soviets produced nearly 18 million tons of steel, 15 million tons of pig iron, and 48 billion kilowatt-hour of electricity. Although the Soviet Union continuously strengthened its military equipment right up to the eve of the war, the Soviet Army's armaments still lagged far behind the German Army in both quantity and quality. Due to the demands of war, the Soviet defense industry made great strides from 1,938. Compared to the early 1,932s, Soviet tank production had more than tripled. From the 1st of January 1939 to the 22nd of June 1941, the Red Army was equipped with over 7,000 tanks. In 1941 alone, the Red Army was supplied with nearly 5,500 tanks, 2,963 field guns, and 5,247 mortars. The total number of artillery pieces and mortars, including tank cannons, was 92,578. In 1939, the Soviet Union built 9 new aircraft factories and 7 engine factories. Additionally, 7 other factories were converted to produce aircraft components. By the end of 1940, Soviet aircraft production had increased by 70%. General Zhukov asserted that in just 1 to 1.5 years, The Red Army's Air Force would have been upgraded with new types of aircraft with very powerful combat capabilities. However, not enough new model aircraft had been built, so about 75–80% of the total Soviet air fleet still consisted of older types produced before 1937. These older aircraft were inferior to Germany's new models in technical specifications. In terms of tactical organization and pilot skill, the German Air Force had 3 years of combat experience across Europe and was thus very seasoned. In contrast, most Soviet pilots had no combat experience or had not completed their training courses when the war broke out. The Soviet infantry consisted of 170 divisions, with 149 of them in the European part of the country, along with 29,673 field guns and 54,076 mortars. Despite having nearly 20,000 tanks, with about 12,000 stationed in European territory, most were light tanks with thin armor and weak firepower, like the T-26 and BT-5. At the time, the Soviet Union had only 1,861 medium and heavy tanks, including 508 kilovolts, 1 and kV 2 seconds, and 967 tons, 34 seconds. When hostilities began, armored units were still in the process of being formed, tank crews were not fully trained, and many units lacked ammunition, fuel, and even crews and technical teams. Consequently, many tanks broke down or ran out of fuel and were knocked out of the fight without ever engaging the enemy. The Air Force had 17,745 aircraft, of which only about 3,719 were new models, like the Yak-1, MiG-3, and Lajag-3. There were 460 P-2 seconds, 249 Il-2 seconds, and 980 I-16 seconds. The remaining aircraft were old and slow, some even being wooden biplanes from the First World War era. Pilot training had not been completed, and fully trained pilots were very few. Many Soviet pilots at the front had only flown for 4 hours. On the eve of the war, the Soviet Navy had nearly 600 warships, 211 submarines, over 1,000 coastal defense guns, and more than 2,500 aircraft. Nearly 270 vessels of various types were built towards the end of 1,940. Many new naval bases were constructed, while areas in the Baltic, Black Sea, and Arctic Sea were fortified by the Red Army. However, the German army could not easily cross the Soviet border. Every border post and every Soviet unit fought to the last. The Germans had to wait for reinforcements to break this tenacious resistance. Soviet soldiers not only defended the border but also forced the Germans to retreat, despite the German advantage in manpower and equipment. For example, the naval base of Liepaja in Latvia was heroically defended. The Germans initially expected to capture the city in a single day, but the small border garrison, with the help of civilians, repelled attacks for a whole week, inflicting heavy losses on the enemy. On the southern front, the Soviet army went on the offensive, seizing bridgeheads and restoring its combat capability. The first air battles demonstrated the superior advantage of the ace pilots the Soviet Union possessed. Military analysts assess that the German Air Force suffered its heaviest losses of all of 1,941 on June 22, when Soviet pilots shot down 72 enemy aircraft. The Red Army's defeat at the very beginning of the Great Patriotic War became the foundation for victory. If it weren't for the defensive, hold-the-line battles of the first echelon, the second strategic echelon would not have had time to reach the Daugava and Dnieper rivers. They gained precious time to bring up main units, establish a new defensive line, and evacuate civilians and industrial facilities. The blitzkrieg plan anticipated breaking the Soviet army in border battles, annihilating its main forces before they reached the Daugava and Dnieper line. After that, Hitler expected to advance to Leningrad and Kiev, then Moscow. In the south, they would reach near Kharkov, and the entire military campaign would be completed in 3 to 4 months, before the onset of the cold winter. However, the scheme for a quick victory failed within the first few weeks. The Nazi German army lost over 90,000 soldiers and officers, killed, wounded, or missing. The war dragged on for 4 long years, ending not as Hitler had wished. It can be said that the German attack on Soviet territory was characterized by its unprecedented scale and ferocity, its horrific destructiveness, and its irreparable loss of human life due to war, famine, disease, and massacres. This was also where many concentration camps were located, the site of death marches, and the epicenter of the Holocaust against people of Jewish descent. Here, the German army ordered the execution of Jews, Roma, and communists, as well as civilians suspected of aiding partisans. Tens of millions of people died in this brutal conflict. This war was of immense importance to the outcome of World War II and was a primary cause of Germany's defeat and the collapse of the fascist regime in Europe. After the war, the Soviet Union rose to become a military and industrial superpower. Communist parties established governments in most of Eastern Europe. Germany was divided by the Allies into the German Democratic Republic and the Federal Republic of Germany. The world formed two poles, and new, simmering conflicts began. And that was our journey to understand why the Red Army of the Soviet Union could not smash Nazi Germany from the very first days of the attack. In your opinion, without a harsh winter, could the Third Reich's army have conquered the entire land of the White Birches? Leave your opinion in the comments below. And now, for the answer to the question from the beginning of the video. Germany's Army Group South possessed a total of 42 divisions and 13 brigades, including 9 incredibly powerful panzer divisions. And now, a sneak peek at our next video.